So this presentation is what is a game designer? Because I think it's something that is oftentimes misunderstood. And I guess we'll get started. There's the arrow key, nothing happens. So we're going to get started by clicking the arrow key. There we go. Now let's try the arrow keys again. Okay, now we're good. All right, so a little bit about me. I have about 12 years of game development experience between hobby and professional work, so about 4.5 years of professional work. And I've done world design. That's my current role. I'm a world designer at Zapper Games. Before that, I worked at Funcom, but Zapper's a startup, just started there in October. And that's really cool, and it's a lot of fun so far. Level design, I've done that, and game design. So primarily my focus is on world and level design, but I kind of overall consider myself a game designer. A lot of skills are shared, like the core principles of design at large, whether it's game design or otherwise, are kind of present through all of the design disciplines. I also graduated from NC State University. I was in the Business Administration and Information Technology program, and now I have a lot of student debt that has a job for nothing to do with what I went to school for. But that's fine. I'm glad I went. We'll talk about that later. Also, NC State is awesome. There's some of the projects I've worked on. Unfortunately, I can't show you my cooler stuff because it's top secret. I've worked on 3 or 4 projects I can't talk about, but that's why I put top secret there, so it sounds cool. So a quick overview of the presentation, which I've divided into levels because games. What is a game designer? What does a game designer do? How do I become a game designer? If you're interested. If you're not interested to become a game designer, no hard feelings. It's the coolest job. And I also, Halo is my favorite game series of all time. And I have filled this presentation with red versus blue memes and other Halo things. So if you don't know what red versus blue is, oh well. So level 1, what is a game designer? That's a great question, Evan. So I've prepared this meme. I think that's what it's called. It might be a good meme. It might be a bad meme. What our society thinks I do is play video games all day. What my friends think I do is that I am a programmer. Is that person programming? I can't. It kind of looks like it. What my family thinks I do is create beautiful artwork and have color palettes on my desk. What my wife thinks I do is actually pretty close to what I do. That guy's making Minecraft cube or something, so I don't quite do that. But what I think I do is show people cool stuff, and they're like, wow, that's pretty exciting. And what I actually do is make that. It's more exciting than that, but if you laugh, that means the meme worked. So I have a boring answer. Game designer is someone who applies creative and analytical intelligence through an iterative and collaborative design process to ideate, prototype, and implement engaging interactive experiences within constantly evolving constraints. I need a sip of water here in a second. It's a lot. Confused screaming. That's what that is. So I have a fun answer too. Game designer is someone who loves making video games just as much as playing them and works together with others to bring their imagination to life. Pixels and blood pumping. That's what this is. That's going on. So let's talk about 5 traits a game designer should have. 1, they should be a gamer. If you guys aren't gamers, I don't really know why you're here. There are some people in the industry that came from other industries like visual effects or engineering. Someone I worked with before, he was an engineering director. He doesn't really play video games, but he loves how interesting games are to make from just a programming engineering standpoint. Games are complex and people like complex problems. Well, not all people, but some people. He was really good at what he did. Creative. And this is kind of true for every discipline, whether you're an artist, a programmer, QA, whatever. It's very important to be creative and kind of spawn ideas, think outside the box, etc. Analytical. When you have ideas, you have to be able to look at those ideas from different perspectives and all kinds of different angles. Whether they're your ideas or someone else's ideas, you have to be able to take them and kind of rotate them around, see what the problems are, see what the solutions are, see what the opportunities are. Collaborative. This one's very, 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 very important. Game design is a massive exercise in collaboration. And I think the best game designers are the ones who know enough to be dangerous about every other discipline. And I think the worst game designers are the people who don't care about other disciplines, because everyone on the team has a valid opinion and everyone has different perspectives and opinions than you. And when you're designing something, whether that's an iPhone, a car, or a video game, you need as many perspectives as possible to be able to kind of understand what you're making and refine it to be the best possible product it can be under constraints, but we'll get to that later. And inquisitive. You have to be excited to explore, learn new things. The industry is notorious for being, just like all technology industries, really fast paced with new information coming all the time. Like the paradigms of what's a good game and what's a bad game are constantly changing. Like Battle Royale went, and the first person shooter genre kind of adapted accordingly. A lot of people's favorite shooter games now are Battle Royale games. And part of that coming to be was someone being inquisitive and trying to redefine some of their favorite things about games they've enjoyed to create something new. I don't know, are you? Am I? So there's a few different game design specializations, or a lot. Game designer, level designer, technical designer, systems designer, economy designer, content designer, encounter designer, narrative designer, multiplayer designer, user experience designer, also less popular, monetization designer, because games need to make money, but some people choose different ways to do that than others. If you want, I can describe a little bit more of each of these, or I can just keep on rolling. So, and the next slide will be very relevant to this. So an encounter designer might be someone who explicitly creates combat encounters, puzzles, stuff like that. So if a level designer created an arena, then an encounter designer might populate it with enemy AI spawns, pathing logic, stuff like that. And the next slide is very relevant for this, because role specialization versus team size. The bigger the team, the more specialized roles you'll have. Smaller the team, less specialized. So in my current role, I think we have 12 employees currently. So I get to wear a few different hats. I've been doing world design stuff. I've been doing game design stuff. I've been doing a little bit of art stuff. I've been doing like building logic and blueprints and stuff, and kind of getting to mess with all kinds of things, which is a lot of fun to me because I like to learn all kinds of different things. But the situation where you might see something like an encounter designer is when you have a very large team with a lot of people. So at my previous company, I was working on a team of about, well, I worked on several different team sizes. So I worked on a team of about 50 people, then on a team of about 70 people, then on a team, I think that was encroaching on 200 people and growing. And as you know, you get bigger, you start to need to break down tasks into more specific things. So if someone working on Assassin's Creed, you might have an artist who specializes in creating interior building assets like pottery or plates or garbage cans or whatever. And you might have a different artist who solely specializes in vegetation or even skyboxes. I know Bungie, for instance, for Halo and Destiny, they've always had a skybox artist, which is a cool job, I think, because man, do those look good. But yeah, for example, at Zapper right now, we have a technical designer, me as a world designer, a lead environment artist, a lead user experience programmer, a senior systems programmer, an audio designer, another programmer, and I think, oh, and the founders and directors. But we're all kind of wearing multiple hats. So I personally like to be more at bottom side of the chart, both as I've gotten started with my career and where I'd like to be in the future, probably. Just because I think there's a lot of fun to be had in a smaller team. But there's also a lot of benefits to being in a bigger team, because in a bigger team, you can achieve more than smaller teams often can. You're not going to make the next giant, great Elden Ring, AAA open world monster smashing thing with a team of 5 people, right? But with a team of 600 that's distributed across multiple countries, you can. Any questions so far? Cool. What does a game designer do? Do I even know? Let's find out. So the design process, some of you might have heard about this in some of your classes for software development or whatever. So I've kind of broken this down in my own interpretation. So step 1, I would call research and competitive analysis. Step 2, brainstorming and ideation. Step 3, prototyping and implementation, or testing and feedback. And 5, iteration and validation. These are a big loop. You got to have a graph because it's a presentation. So it's important to note that this loop should ideally be iterative and happen a lot over and over again. Now's my opportunity for a water break, so I'm going to do that. Please don't critique how I drink water. So we're going to go through each of these phases one at a time. Research and competitive analysis. So this is something I'm doing right now as we're early in the project. So we're doing a little bit of this and a little bit of just prototyping and stuff. So this could be exploring the ins and outs of a competitor's games. Like, why is the combat great? Can we improve it? Why is it bad? Why is the puzzle not great? Can we fix it? Can we make it great? Can we make it more interesting? Is it derivative? Can we make something unique that hasn't been seen before? And understanding your competitors is the key to surpassing them. So Fortnite and Epic understood the shortcomings of things like PUBG, and they use that to their advantage to become the biggest game on the planet. And I'd say one thing that got really well was accessibility. They were on every platform, mobile phones, console, you name it. They had crossplay on every platform. Didn't matter which platform you're on, you can still play with your friends. And you think about how many people who are younger play that game, a lot of people get their hardware from their parents. And one friend you have might have gotten a PlayStation, one might have gotten an Xbox, one might have got a gaming PC. That doesn't stop them from being friends, but in the past it stopped them from playing together. So Fortnite made playing their game accessible with everyone, for everyone, in any way you can imagine. It also has a quirky art style that's easier for parents to say yes to, whereas PUBG is kind of gritty, realistic. And when a parent looks at that, they might say, I don't know if I want my younger child to play that. Fortnite, it still has shooting and stuff, but it's not very violent. It's not very grotesque. And so they saw a market opportunity where they can say, we're going to make a mass market shooter for this kind of audience. And it worked. And when you do this, it's important to actually understand the analysis you're doing and kind of document that and kind of keep reference. So something I love to do is play a research game and then just record videos of certain mechanics or environments or features and just kind of have a library of videos. And this is something I've kept with work documents, but also on my personal PC. So if I remember something, I can go there and I've got a little bit of a library and can look at that and say, oh, this mechanic from this game, I really want to see how that works because it was really cool. And I want to think about how I could maybe do that or even do it better or understand how it works. Yes, we're archiving. That's what we're doing. Brainstorming and ideation. So in order to come up with cool ideas, you have to actually think of them. But you can't just think of ideas that are aimless. Sometimes you can, but when you're brainstorming, your goal should be to answer your design problems and questions. So if our design problem is, how do we get the player to go from here to there? And maybe the solution is you put a teleporter here because the floor is filled with sludge. Or maybe you give them a grappling hook or a float or glide ability or something like that. But the ideas you're generating are to address a solution. Like, how can the player feel powerful? Maybe that's the invincibility star in Mario and they power up and they just stampede through enemies, knocking them away effortlessly. Why would the player visit the castle? That's a great question in Resident Evil. I don't know why anyone would visit that castle, truthfully. It doesn't seem like a friendly place. And of course, when you do this, it's important to document organized ideas to analyze later. Although with documentation, there's always the caveat of you want documentation to be a living document. You want to be able to come back to it and change it because the vision for your game and your implementation of different things evolves over time. So something you documented 1 year into the game's development might be something very different to what that feature actually is 3 years into the game's development. So when you create documentation, you don't want to be so explicit where it's a chore to change it. You want it to feel easy to change and fluid, make it very accessible to people. It should also be something that people from different disciplines can interpret quickly and parse to get information very easily. Exceptions might be very specific technical design documents or like engineering design documents where you have to be very explicit about this is how this system functions. And when you do have strong ideas, as a game designer, you might be in a situation where you need to pitch those ideas. So sometimes you receive ideas that you're responsible for implementing, figuring out, whatever. But sometimes your ideas you have to pitch to someone who's in charge. And if the pitch goes well and people want to try it out, you prototype and test it. But this isn't always the case, because sometimes you have, and again, a benefit of being on a smaller team is you can often have the autonomy to just try stuff out and then share it, or talk about it and just immediately give it a go. And that's also kind of depends on where you're at in the production cycle. So right now, we're heading towards pre-production, but we're kind of in an experimental phase. And so there's more room to try that stuff out. If we are, 6 months from release, hopefully we're fixing bugs and getting ready to launch and meet certification for platform holders. Although for some people, they're working until the day the game launches, and then you get your day one patch. But during the certification process, you can't really make a lot of meaningful content updates to the game, because you submit a game to like Microsoft or Sony, and they evaluate and say, yes, this is good for our platform. But during that time, you could have a separate branch where you're like adding content, fixing bugs, whatever. Prototyping and implementation, this is the fun part. Prototyping ideas allows designs to be tested. That's very, 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 very important. And that's what a lot of you are doing right now. I think there's probably good ways and bad ways to do prototyping. Sometimes there's a tendency to take a feature farther than it needs to be taken. So for an example, this developer of Sea of Thieves, Rare, if you look at something like their GDC talks or just stuff about their game on the internet, you'll see that some of the earliest prototypes, you had just a blocky ship with like little cylinder people on it. And that's great, because sometimes there's a tendency to make things present better, just to make a better impression to people who are in charge or, cutting the checks. That being said, it is important to make sure that the design has an appropriate amount of information delivered to the player so that people can reliably validate whether or not it's fun. So if you are creating a feature and there's something that needs to be communicated to the player, if it's not in your prototype, it's possible the player will misinterpret it, or they'll miss something important, and then they'll decide it's not fun. So a great example is health. Health is something that requires a lot of feedback for the player. So a lot of you are probably familiar with the red around the edges of your screen when you're low health. Or in Mario, you get 3 chances to get knocked out. You're like Big Mario, and then Medium Mario, and then Small Mario. So if that information weren't there, and you got hit 3 times and then died, that leaves the player feeling a little like, eh. Or another example might be if you have an ability that's an area of effect and it bounces people away from you. If you just have like a sphere that's like a wireframe sphere, so it's like a line here and a line here and a line in the middle, that's something that can be really easy to miss. So if you're playing the game and someone's playing it for the first time and they bump into people and it's knocking them back, they may miss that and not understand why people are getting knocked back. And it may feel like a bug or a glitch or something. So that's something that you kind of have to balance when you're creating prototypes is, what do I absolutely critically need to sell the intent of this feature and make sure players experiencing the game actually understand what it is they're playing. So back to what I'm actually talking about on the slide. Does the paper design work? This can be tricky to do. Sometimes you're able to take what you know about other games and kind of toss it around, tweak it on paper, whether it's a drawing or you're writing something out or just ideas. And there's kind of an opportunity to think about it alongside with coworkers, like, here's what I'm thinking, here's my ideas, what do you think? And get some feedback. But a lot of times the transition from paper to the actual game engine, things can change completely, especially as it relates to level design, because level design on a piece of paper is 2D, which could be okay if your game is 2D, but as soon as you get into a 3D space, that's a little harder to interpret with paper. And for level and world design specifically, I'm hopping constantly in playtesting as the character and just seeing what the player sees. And if you're evaluating if something works or not, you want to find out why does it work or why does it not work. So if you have, Mario getting stomped on the head, but you don't actually have a way to tell players that it's 3 stomps before you're dead, that's something you have to figure out, like, why are people not getting it? What can I add to make sure people understand the design? And when you have a prototype that does work, then it's the candidate for implementation, because you might take a feature to version 0.5. And if people really like it, like one of you gave the example of your shooter game you're making, and you have a level that you weren't expecting people to like, then they actually did. Okay, well, take that level and work it up, like make it something that, you know, if they're having fun, that's a good sign. And of course, implementation takes your prototypes into complete features, and that's a process that can take a lengthy amount of time. Playtesting and feedback, very, 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 very important, especially as it relates to getting fresh eyes on something. So your playtesting allows your designs to be validated. If you're not validating your designs, there's a risk that you never find out they don't work. And the very scary thing is, if you have just released your game and you have things in it that have not been validated as having merit in that game or having fun or appealing to an audience, then the reception of the game might not be that great. So when you do have a prototype, you need to be validating it so much as, of course, is it fun, but also, does it meet your goals? Does it solve a problem that you have? Does it answer a question that you have? Yeah, idea and reality are different things. So that goes back to the paper design. You can draw a level on paper. If you were to just build that verbatim in 3D, might not work well at all. So it's a good idea to make sure you're assessing the state of your ideas as they become realized in the game, and make sure that you're okay with tweaking your idea, throwing it away completely in service of what actually works. Of course, why is it fun or not fun? And sometimes this is a question that I think people forget to ask themselves. At the end of the day, the definition of fun is weird, right? We have games like walking simulators, and as people affectionately call them, games where the idea of fun is more about engagement or imparting a message. Like, sometimes you watch a movie that's a mystery or a thriller or a horror, and the idea of it being fun in the same way that bouncing on a trampoline is fun, it's a little different. But just in general, like, is it engaging? Like, does it elicit a positive response from the player? Whether it makes them cry because it's really sad and emotional. Does it make them feel like a badass because they're shooting giant rockets everywhere and blowing up buildings? And of course, feedback is critical to effectively assessing designs. So there's a risk if you don't reach out to others for feedback. You're kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the things you think are important or the things you think are valuable, they're really just the things you think are valuable. And at the end of the day, a game is for more than just yourself. So you should constantly be talking to other people to get their opinions. I think a great example is someone I worked with who a lot of people I've worked with who are not good at navigating 3D spaces, which is really important for level design and world design. And they're like, don't worry about me. Like, I have trouble in all games. And it's like, no, I'm very concerned about you, because to the best of my ability, I want to accommodate your ability to play this game in a way that makes you want to be in our game world and feel excited to play this game and not excluded. And there's a balance to that as well, right? Because that kind of player might not be the player we're targeting. But if there's an opportunity to balance the wants and needs of the players we are targeting with those who are not, there might be an opportunity to bring new players in and help them find an experience that they otherwise wouldn't enjoy. Fortnite might also be another good example of that, where, PUBG, you have things like really intense bullet drop and lots of inventory management and stuff. And then games like Apex Legends and Fortnite really streamlined that kind of stuff and made it more approachable for other people, especially for the console audience. And each player tester is different with a unique perspective. So, some person we might be making a role-playing game akin to Skyrim. And someone on our team might be someone who doesn't play RPGs. Maybe they only play Mario Party 24/7. They're just grinding out Mario Party. And you might think, well, their opinion's invalid. But again, there's an opportunity that they find something in your game they really latch onto. And I think the survival genre is an interesting example of this, because The survival genre allows people to fulfill a lot of different roles. So for example, one player in a survival game might be really focused on building stuff. That's me usually. Another player might be really focused on exploring and combat. Another might really dig crafting stuff. And you wouldn't know how well those features resonate with different kinds of personas. You didn't talk to those people who aren't just that core group that maybe you think the game's intended for. And another bonus is that a lot of times people who are outside the game you're making, maybe it's not their typical thing, can have a really fun idea about how to innovate in the space you're working on, because the shooter genre is a great example, right? Like the shooter is the biggest genre in the world. There's been a gazillion shooter games. But what kind of idea would someone who only plays a Hello Kitty idle game have for a shooter game? I don't know. It could be a great idea. It could be a bad idea, but the people making Call of Duty probably aren't asking people who play Hello Kitty games what they would want in a shooter game. So maybe there's something there. Yep, there's a lot of not good stuff that happens in playtesting because the game is broke a lot of times. So don't feel bad if your game's broken. You can still get feedback. And then, of course, iteration and feedback loop. So as you iterate, you've gotten your feedback. Now you're doing iteration on your feedback. And this is how your designs are developed over time. So you're going to start with version 1 or version 0, of course. And you're going to iterate to version 1.1, version 1.2, and then eventually we'll get to 2.0, 3.0. Although that's kind of dependent on how much time you have. Because eventually you run out of time and you have to release your product or just put your pencils down. And something you might find in the industry is there are so many permutations of anything you're making creatively, whether it's programming or level design or art or whatever. Eventually you're going to get to the point where that version is the version. And it's kind of a weird feeling because sometimes you'll say, I really like this thing that I did, and that's going in the game. I'm not as huge of a fan of this thing I did. That's also going in the game. But the fact of the matter is that happens, and pencils do go down at some point, and it's okay because you'll be able to take what you learned from the thing you didn't like. That's probably how you got to the thing you did like more. And then for your next project or DLC or whatever, you can apply what you've learned. Incremental and informed improvements. I like iteration informed by intent. I'm not a huge fan of iterating without any kind of feedback or idea about where I'm going because of what I said about endless permutations. So if I have a racetrack for Mario Kart, it's no big deal to snake the path this way and that way and that way. But if I get specific feedback that's like, man, I really wish there was a sick jump somewhere in this course because the other courses have sick jumps. This course doesn't have a sick jump. Consequently, it feels boring. And that's a great intent because I can take that and very quickly iterate on that to implement the sweet jump. So if you're wondering like how you want to improve, kind of think about what are the problems you have, what are your shortcomings, and kind of define the goals you want to accomplish to address those shortcomings. And you'll work a lot faster that way. And of course, you should be playtesting these iterations so that you actually validate through the process that your iterations are effective. And again, that goes back to needing intent. Because if I didn't have specific feedback, I could work on the same level for my entire career, truthfully. I'd probably get bored at some point, but you can iterate, iterate, and iterate, but iteration costs money, right? Because I'm being paid a salary every year, and I need to make sure my use of time is effective. And with enough positive feedback, your design will be validated. If everyone says this is absolutely trash, hopefully that's early enough in the process, and it's not year 3 or truthfully like year 7, and you have a $500 million budget, and then suddenly someone's like, this game is awful. Like we need to fix something. I think an example that's well documented is Anthem from BioWare. So essentially, my understanding of that was they spent and burned so much money and time in pre-production and figuring out the game, and eventually one of the high-level people at EA stepped in and he's like, what is going on here? Like this game needs to be out like that because we're hundreds of millions in debt or whatever. And then they assigned basically a fixer to say, okay, we're going to cut this, that, and that. We're going to prioritize this. This game is going to happen because we need to get some money back no matter what. And you can't iterate forever. So it's good to figure out like what you're actually trying to accomplish through iteration. some people don't always come out fine. I imagine there were some people who probably, that had some probably rolled with the Anthem situation. When you've got a big budget and then you fail to deliver, that's probably not a good situation. So smart iteration. Design constraints. This is fun. It truthfully is fun. So a constraint is defined as a limitation or restriction. And these exist all throughout your design process. And I like to say they could be flexible or stringent. So one that's stringent might be the game director has handed down a requirement to me that says the player absolutely has to be able to triple jump no matter what. And then I have to make sure that triple jumping is in the game and it's a lot of fun and it works and whatever. Or it could be a more flexible requirement. So maybe the game takes place in a ruined city or this multiplayer map is a ruined city. Maybe that's as detailed as the requirement is. So within that context, that could be anything. It could be maybe a skyscraper fell over, or a meteor crashed into the city. Maybe it's a war-torn battlefield and there's like husks of tanks everywhere. And that's something where you kind of have the freedom to play around a bit. And provided or created. So like I said, where the triple jump requirement, that's something that would be provided. And sometimes this is something mandated by the pitch that got you the money to work on the game. So for example, maybe you pitch this game is going to be a fifth-person shooter that takes place in the fourth dimension. I don't know how anyone's going to accomplish that. That sounds wild, but you better figure it out because someone's paying you to do that. Yeah. So alternatively, you might have a created requirement. So requirements are really great in some ways because requirements can challenge you to be creative. And because of that, sometimes you may place requirements on yourself. So maybe you're making that ruined city level and you've got the autonomy to do whatever you want within the context of a ruined city. And maybe for yourself, you impart the challenge. I want there to be a skyscraper that's split in two, and you're going to try to bring that idea to life no matter what, and just have a lot of fun with it. And that's going to present you with unique design challenges. It'll be a lot of fun. It might be a challenge, but it'll be fun to try to implement that. And that can encourage creativity into the implementation. And yeah, we work within these kinds of just constraints, or we discover ways to manipulate them. So maybe with the ruined city idea, your first thought might be, oh, it's a city on Earth, maybe a meteor struck it. Well, maybe that meteor had alien juice in it, and that alien juice has now covered the whole city, and now there's little goo puddles you can jump in that turn you into a cannonball, and now you can roll into people and explode. Who knows what? But that's the idea of kind of manipulating a constraint to be something more interesting than you otherwise might have first imagined it to be. Yep, sometimes that happens. Target audience, this is important. So a professional game designer does not make games for themselves, but for a targeted audience, at least if they want to make money. Because some people might have, maybe someone wants to make the Excel spreadsheet creation simulator, which is a simulation of creating Excel spreadsheets, but without Excel. I don't actually, truthfully, there probably is a market for that kind of game. I'm not part of it, but yeah, when you're a professional designer, you have a target audience, and that target audience is, how your game's going to be successful, make money, and let you make another game. So for the example of Fortnite, their target audience was people who love shooters, people who love battle royales, kids who parents let them play shooter games, whatever. And when you have a target audience, there's no guarantee you're going to be a part of that target audience, but you could be. So the goal of a designer in that case is to research, analyze, understand, and try to wrap your head around what the target audience is and put yourself in their shoes, really emphasize with them. So for example, if you're playing a 2D platformer, you put yourselves in the shoes of someone who loves 2D platformers. So maybe I am not a huge fan of JRPGs, but if I were designing a JRPG, it's my job to understand why people like them, emphasize with them, and figure out how I can make a game that appeals to people who really enjoy JRPGs, which can be a fun challenge. Another fun part of being a designer is motivational psychology. So part of that building a game for a target audience is understanding that audience. Why do they play our games? Why do they care? What motivates them to keep going? And there's something that's being explored in the field called the player experience of need satisfaction, which is similar to it's motivational psychology. You might have heard about explicit and implicit motivation and how that affects people. I recently started reading a book called Drive, which I'd recommend, by Daniel Pink, and it dives into some of this stuff. But as an example from that book, I'll steal it. Credit to Daniel Pink, I guess. There was a study in Sweden where they had people donate blood, or people that are interested in donating blood. I split them into 3 groups. So group 1, they're like, you can donate blood if you want. Group 2, if you donate blood, we'll give you 50 kroner, which is like $7 USD at the time or something. And they told another group, if you donate blood, you'll get the 50 kroner, but you can also directly donate it to the Red Cross or something. So what they found is the people who donated blood, just altruistically, pretty good outcome, a decent number of people went in to donate. The people who got paid to do it, participation tanked. And the people who got paid and then had an option to immediately donate to a charity, participation was really good. And the reason participation tanked with the people who got paid is something that they thought was an altruistic act where they were doing something good. Suddenly it felt selfish because they were being paid. And kind of that explicit motivation or extrinsic motivation had the opposite effect of what you thought it might have, and actually made participation worse and had a negative outcome. So as far as how this field is evolving in game designs, this is something, a white paper you can read if you're interested. It's broken down motivational factors for gamers into 3 things: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So autonomy is the desire of the player to express agency over the world. So if I'm playing Skyrim, I have autonomy when I can choose to use 2 swords and go ///. And competence is the ability of the player to obtain mastery in a game. If I pick my 2 swords, I go ///. I become really good at ///. Or a fighting game is a perfect example. If you're playing Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, whatever, there's a very high skill ceiling and you can go all the way up there. Not me though, I'm not very good at them. And relatedness is your ability to relate to other players, but also kind of the game world, whether that's NPCs or like an animal critter or the way the world looks, or other players like in multiplayer games, like if it's a survival game or the game someone showed me with a shooter, and that's relatedness. We're engaged with each other, and that's a meaningful, motivating experience for me. And now a little bit about kind of a day in the life. So at 8:30 a.m., well, lately more like 8:50 a.m., but work from home, whatever. Follow up on miscommunications. So I get any messages overnight, any emails, anything I need to look out for, things I need to follow up on. Going from a company of like 300 and growing people to a company of 12 people, much less of a big deal. When I wake up, there's no Slack messages. When I worked at my previous company, it was distributed across different countries. So when I wake up, there's all the Slack messages, and it takes a little while to catch up. So then kind of past that, I'll kind of do a quick review of my tasks, see what I need to work on for the day. We use Jira for project management. It's very common in the industry. So I'll kind of look at my backlog on my sprint board, whatever, and see, this task is here, this task is here. Do I need to move anything around? What do I need to work on today? I also really like to use tasks as part of the Microsoft Office suite. It's just a task list. You can assign due dates and stuff, prioritize things. It's something I like to use. At 9:30, we have a stand-up with the team. So we all get in Slack. I think since we're a little bit bigger now and have more employees, we're going to start switching to Teams because Slack can have a max of 15 people, I think, for whatever reason. But we do a stand-up, which if you're familiar with agile methodology and project management, basically we just go around and here's what I worked on yesterday. Here's what I'm working on today. Are there any blockers I have? Is there anything I need? And that's a great way to just like learn what other people in your team are doing. After that, I'll start doing work, and sometimes a little bit before stand-up. And of course, sometimes there's meetings. And around 11:30 to 12, or at 12, I'll take lunch. When we're back in the office, I'd probably go out to lunch with my coworkers once or twice a week. I usually like to pack my lunch though. And then we do that. So afternoon, 1 p.m. I'm back from lunch, whatever. So I'll follow up with anything I might have missed from people who maybe take lunches at different times. More task work and meetings. And at my previous company, we do a regular gameplay test at 3 p.m. Right now, our game's not at my new company, it's not to the point where we could really do a regular organized play test, but it's something I think is highly valuable is having the whole team play test the game regularly. And after that, more task work and meetings. And around the end of the day, I like to prepare for the next day. Blargity blarg blarg honk. That sums it up. Here's a graph. That's fun. I don't know why I chose these colors, by the way. I was playing around. I went to blue and green. I was like, it's kind of a fun color, like so design work. Let's say 15% ideation. It's writing design documents, doing stuff in paper, researching other games. I said research is 5%. Playtesting, 10%. As you move through the project, these percentages would probably change. So near the end of the project, when we're getting closer to launch, I'd expect more people are contributing to playtest more regularly. Iteration, big chunk of time, because when you make a prototype, it's probably not that great yet, and then you iterate on it. And prototyping, I said, is about 30%. In terms of all my work, design work is, of course, most of it, which is great. Meetings, 35%. That's definitely different going from a larger company to a smaller company, because now I have like one meeting a week, sometimes more, and that's really nice because then that design work percentage goes from 60% to like 90% or something. So that's great. Because I remember I had 1 week, one time where 2 weeks actually, the whole sprint was pretty much just planning meetings. Whew, that was an onslaught. Show and tell. So this is crap I worked on just personally. So on the top left, that's a prototype of something I built in Unreal. Bottom left is just an example of iterating on a level. Top right, just pictures from my design journals. Bottom right is prototype level, block out to completion. But yeah, I do all kinds of stuff. I work in blueprints. I make assets in Blender. I play around with Substance Designer sometimes. I do doodles and take notes in my design journals. And of course, I do white box, gray box, but I also do level art and set dressing. Highly recommend having a design journal if you're interested in designing. I really like to just write down ideas, even if I don't look at them until like 3 years later. Maybe there's something cool in there. Like to doodle pictures of levels, do little sketches. I also like to, if I've played a game, I want to make sure I play it for the sake of playing a game first. And then if there's something I'm interested in it in terms of research, then I'll go back and maybe flip bits or pieces here or there and take notes in a journal like that. Level 3. Any questions at this point? You can think about it while I take another water break. Sure. You can give me a F to A rating. You know, that's what I strived for when I was here as a student. So any other questions? Her hand was raised, so I'm going to go with her first. Sorry. You're good. Sure. So I guess I'll repeat the question for the Zoom audience. The question was essentially, is psychology, like thinking about different kinds of psychology, a big part of making sure that there's a positive experience for the players? So I'd say, as a designer, it's important to always be thinking about the player experience as far as it relates to yourself and others, and kind of be thinking about and analyzing the different decisions players might make when confronted with different things in your games. And that can come from by thinking about things like motivational psychology, as well as just watching people play during play tests. One of my favorite things is when I'm standing over here and someone's here and they're playing the game, and then they do something and I'm like, that's not what I did when I made that thing, but now I know, which is especially fun in level design because you're like, players are totally going to go that way. And then they go like the complete opposite way and like get stuck in a corner or something. It's like, I try, whatever. But yeah, I think it's not like I'm actively like doing psychoanalysis of like people, but one thing we do like to do is create player profiles or player stories. And like, these are the 3 types of people that play our games. These are the collectors, these are the fighters, these are the, I guess like the survival game example, these are the builders, and kind of what are the things that are valuable to these players and which one of these player types do we care the most about? We care about all of them, just care about the builder. And then when we have those kinds of players, we can look at, are they engaging with the things we thought they would engage with, or is there some kind of mismatch there? So yeah, I just in general, I think it's important to always have a mind, put yourself in the player's shoes constantly. And that includes play testing a lot and just kind of getting in there and talking to your coworkers, like turn around to the person behind you and be like, hey, can you come over here and look at this thing? Can you give it a try? But yeah, always thinking about the player experience. And that's especially important with the target audience thing. And just what kind of players are we targeting? What is their experience with this game? What do we want it to be? And how does that expectation differ from reality? Yes.
Just asking what your favorite preferred 3D engine, not 3D game, like Maya, Blender.
So in terms of my 3D art skills, I know enough to make things that look like the things you think, how you imagine they look like, for like white box, gray box, whatever. Like I can make, a crate or a bush or, a power up thing. And it's a skill set I'm actively trying to improve and evolve just because I really enjoy it. We'll get to that in this section. But yeah, Blender is super awesome. I've used Maya, I've used 3ds Max, I've used Modo, I've used Google SketchUp, all kinds of stuff. And Blender just continues to be massively impressive, and it's free. And I can even use it for professional work. So that's really cool. I'm what I call a blendy, because a former coworker, actually he's a current coworker as well. We are both big fans of Blender. He's our lead environment artist. He has a massive background in all kinds of 3D applications. Even he loves Blender. But someone else I've worked with before, he was like 3ds Max. I don't want to learn Blender, which is fair because people become really adept in a piece of software, and that means they're really fast at it. They know exactly what they're doing. They know, if they want to do something, they know how to do it. And we were always teasing him like, you should try Blendy, be a Blendy. I don't know if he ever became a Blendy. So yeah, it is free to become a Blendy, and that's a good reason to do anything, I think. No, don't listen to that. That's probably bad advice. Question.
I know obviously it varies based on what you're looking for. When you're playing a game, you're trying to like pay attention to what you like about it. Is there anything in particular you always kind of keep an eye out for now when you're playing games? Like something whenever you play a new game, you're like, oh, how do they do this? Is there something in particular you always watch out for?
No, that's when I put my research hat on. That's not this hat, by the way. It's a different hat. I'm one of the hat crew at work. When I worked at Funcom, there's definitely a hat crew, like some of us that wore a hat every day. Now I'm part of the new hat crew at Zapper. I take my hatting very seriously. But yeah, I think I try to make sure I play a game just for fun when I play it for the first time, but it's almost impossible to not like see something and be like, oh, this is really cool. Like, let me think a little bit more about this. And it's actually a hard thing to do because I think there's value in, as a designer or just a game developer in general, playing new games and not trying to overanalyze it, because that can stop you from just enjoying it. But it's funny because sometimes people ask, like, do you get bored of making games when you start making games? I've been doing game making stuff since I was 12, in actual like game engines and stuff, and to a lesser extent, since I was like 6, making maps in like Age of Empires scenario editor or Command and Conquer or Time Splitters or whatever. And I've always loved it. And then as a professional, it's awe-inspiring to see some of the things other people in the industry are able to accomplish. And I'm always impressed when I play different kinds of games, no matter what, whether it's from an indie studio or the biggest AAA studio. Like there's always stuff that excites me, even though I can kind of know behind the scenes probably what's going on. So I always really just try to enjoy the game, have fun with it, and if I want to come back later and think about it a little bit more, I do. Although sometimes I can't help myself. I'm just like, that's really cool. And then my problem is I'll tell my wife about it. She plays games with me, and I'll be like, what's really cool is that they did this thing. Why they did this thing is because they did this other thing. And she's like, whatever. She just wants to keep playing Destiny. Witch Queen, by the way, Witch Queen's great so far. I was jamming to that soundtrack during work today. Any other questions? Yes.
When you're having
Probably depends. I mean, it could be just in a blockout level and you made a new weapon or a new race car or whatever. And like, hey, just, drive around. Hey, give the thumbsticks a feel, press the keys on the keyboard, just give it a try, play around with it. So I think it can be as small of a chunk of the game or as big of a chunk of the game as you want. If you're asking your coworkers, it's probably important to be cognizant of their time. Same with QA. If you have QA engineers, testers, they have lots of other stuff to work on too, but they might have a bigger chunk of time to dedicate to larger things that need to be evaluated. And then of course, you might later on in development have some kind of user experience testing or focus group testing. When I was at Funcom, we had some different teams, and we had the team from upstairs in the office come downstairs and play what we were working on, and they kind of played for an hour, and the rest of us creepily stood around them and just kind of watched them play, which is probably intimidating. Unfortunately, we were not wearing lab coats, but that would have been kind of cool. But yeah, I mean, depending on the people, depending on the feature, there's never, I don't think there's many wrong ways to do a play test as long as it satisfies what you're hoping to accomplish. So if you just want, you have someone on your team, she loves playing Overwatch, she's really good at hero shooters, you're making a hero that shoots things for a game, and you say, hey, can you come try this person out? And they're like, oh, this kind of reminds me of Ash, or this kind of reminds me of Soldier 76 or something. Oh, I really like this, but what if it did this? Or like, this is something I'm expecting. So yeah, it's circumstantial, I'd say. Any other questions? I'll also answer random life questions, like what my favorite color is. It's definitely not black or red. That's all that's in my wardrobe, by the way. Yes. At one point I had more. Most of them were NC State hats. I gave some of them to my parents because my dad likes wearing hats for long work. Right now I have 6 caps or 3 caps like this, 3 that are a different kind of baseball cap, dad cap, whatever you want to call it. And then I have a collection of beanies. I've got one with a poof on it. I've got one that's kind of like droopy in the back. I've got another one with a poof on it because poofs are fun. Yep, and they're generally all black, red, and gray, like the rest of my clothing. Yes.
What's your favorite level or world in the game?
First, I was just talking to one of my coworkers about this today because he mentioned, do you know how they did the level design in Halo? And I'm like, and then he was like, I don't want, like, I know you're working, I don't want to like bother you. Like, when you ask me about Halo and level design, we're done. I was already pulling up pictures on Google Images and like looking up videos on YouTube. But yeah, I mean, there's so many environments and levels and stuff I really enjoy. A lot of fun memories tied to arena shooters, especially Halo. Definitely Lockout is a Halo map. Deck 17 and Unreal Tournament 3 is a level I really enjoy. Trying to think of a recent example. It's a question with so many answers. One of my all-time favorite games is Battlefield Bad Company 2, which I think is the best Battlefield game. It had stellar level design with a lot of really awesome maps. Ones I can name off the top of my head are like Port Valdez, Atacama Desert, Valparaiso. I don't know if those mean anything to you, but I could think of a bunch of more stuff, but probably don't want to stand here waiting for me to think of stuff forever. Anything else? All right, level 3, how to become a game designer. Are any of you interested in being a game designer? Wow, cool. Okay. But so a lot of the stuff I've said in this talk though is actually really useful for all the different disciplines. Game development is super collaborative. People are super interconnected, or at least they should be. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Just make something. And you all are already doing a great job of this. A lot of times people, one of my favorite things is you'll see sometimes on like the Unreal Engine forums or other game development forums, someone who wants to get into game development and they'll pitch their idea in the forums and they're going to say, I want to make the next 5,000 player, massively online zombie survival space shooter, kitchen cooking simulator game. And then the next reply will be insane. It'll never happen. But good for them for thinking about it. But yeah, experiments in game design comes from designing games, which a lot of you are already working on right now. And even if you're doing different disciplines, you're all kind of coordinating and sharing ideas and stuff, which is great. And if you have an idea, just try to create it any way you can. So that could be a physical prototype. Maybe you're like, I want a catapult that does this. You get marshmallows and sticks and do whatever. When I worked at Funcom, we had one time where we prototyped some stuff using Lego pieces. That was kind of cool and quirky. And then the Legos sat on the table in the break room for a while and people went and played with the Legos, which is even better. And of course, virtual prototypes, which is what all of you are doing now. And start small. This is the biggest advice I usually give to people is don't try to make the game of your dreams or do everything you want to accomplish at once. I sometimes tell people if you were making, let's say a role-playing game, I think your game would be a success if you had one character, one weapon, you could swing, you can block, you have one enemy, and you have one tiny level. If you can get all that, I mean, you've already made a game, and then you can just go from there. But there's a tendency to want to come up with all these grand plans and ideas, do a lot of design documentation, whatever. And then when you're incapable of accomplishing it because you've overscoped yourself, you've set the bar too high, that's a really defeating and thing that can kind of demotivate you. Because when you fail to reach that goal, you're kind of like, well, let me start another project. Let me try something different. And then you might do the same thing. You're like, and then your interest kind of dwindles because you're not making meaningful progress. So if you can make something really small, like a Flappy Bird clone, you can finish it. Finishing something is really important because when you finish it, you're like, wow, I can do this. I can do the thing. I can make a game. And now I can take what I learned from making that one, make a bigger, better, more interesting game. So that's really important. It's just kind of keeping scope in mind, understand what you're capable of, where you're comfortable pushing your boundaries and learning new things, and what the people you're working with are capable of. Yep. Just share something. Sharing is really important. And you guys did this with me today. So sharing your work and collecting feedback, critical to growth. Again, if you kind of sit in a bubble and you're doing your own thing and maybe you're making Spreadsheet Simulator, but for the few people that would be totally into Spreadsheet Simulator, if you don't talk to them and find out what they're interested in, maybe you missed a critical function, which is being able to put GIFs in your spreadsheet cells. Maybe, I don't know, but that feedback is really important. And positive and negative feedback, both are critical to you being able to grow as a designer or just a game developer in general. And without feedback, it's tough to grow as a designer because your goal is to kind of, if you have a cube, you want to turn it around and look at every angle, and you're going to interpret the things you look at and the perspective you have. And feedback's important to being able to look at those different perspectives in new ways and kind of change how you look at things. So if your project is ready, get it in front of people, and this can be a lot sooner than you think. But I kind of rewind to something I said before is kind of be sure to balance not overcomplicating or taking something too far. Like, you know, if you're at the stage of the project a lot of you are in right now, you don't need like a fully arted up character, right? Especially if it's like a first person game. So, you know, the game might be ready when it just has cylinder people. Like all of your games, I saw things that are interesting or things that we can kind of iterate on and evolve and think about. But it's also important to make sure you're sharing it to the right people at the right time. Some people are going to be less understanding of what they're looking at different points in the development process. So all of you get what kind of a gray box early prototype game looks like. Some people might not get that. They might see gray boxy walls or whatever and be like, what is, like, I don't understand what's happening. Like they might see a line trace you're firing out of your gun instead of an actual projectile, and they might not get that. So that's actually a really good example of doing enough to telegraph to help someone validate your design. Is if a line trace isn't cutting it, like people don't know what that is. People do understand what a rocket is. So if you get the rocket in there, maybe in practice it's just a line trace, or maybe it's a projectile or whatever, but the rocket really helps sell the idea of what it is you're after. And that can help you validate and help people give you the correct feedback. And you can do this with like a portfolio website. You can do this with social media, maybe TikTok. I don't know. I don't know what the game dev TikTok scene is like. A packaged release, and maybe you actually release on some kind of website like itch.io, IndieDB, ModDB, whatever. Like you guys did here, it was great to kind of look at your projects. It's a great way to do that. Always be designing. Designers have homework, but it's fun. We already talked a little bit about it. Experience different games, analyze those games, imagine ways you could change those games or create something new, and then do it. Pew, pew, pew. Yeah, I mean, this is going back to one of the first things I said about traits a game designer should have. Is you need to be a gamer. And my biggest hobby besides playing games is making games. So a lot of times it might be like a weekend morning and I'm working on a personal game development project. I'm like trying to advance my art skills or my programming skills or whatever. But yeah, always be coming up with ideas, trying things out, taking a look at other games, breaking down other games, watching videos on YouTube of other people breaking down games, watching things like GDC talks, just kind of keep the engine going. And if you love what you do, it doesn't feel like extra work or homework. It's more like you just want to do that stuff because you enjoy it. And at least in my experience, the idea of working on a prototype project of some kind on a Saturday morning, I'm totally cool with that. I don't feel like I'm wasting my time. I feel like I'm enjoying myself. I can do something different than I do at work, and it kind of keeps me fresh and learn new skills, which is very important in professional work because the industry moves so quickly. You're always going to need new skills. Just be a lifelong learner is important. Look at that, explore and learn. Yeah, video games are really complicated products, and they're made by very different people. Sometimes those groups of people are large, sometimes they're small, and everyone has something unique to bring to the table. So we have designers, engineers, artists, composers, audio designers, animators, what have you, and then the monetization designer, even your producer, whatever. And each of these add value, and each is relevant to design, incredibly relevant to design. Games are really unique in just how interconnected they are and how important every discipline is to the whole package. I think a good example of this is if you're making a 3D asset, like let's say you're making a storage box and you work it up and you complete it. And the first time you put it in the game engine is when it's actually done. You might put it in the game engine and find out, this box is 5 times bigger than the player. It was supposed to be this tall, but actually it's this tall. Critical miscalculation. Ideally, you would have figured out those metrics in some way beforehand, but it's important to keep dialogue flowing between different disciplines and kind of reach alignment on what you need. And especially, I think it's really important for a designer to talk to people from different disciplines. I think some people might have the tendency to think, well, they're not a designer, so they don't actually know anything. And that's not true, because designers are not idea generators. Designers implement ideas, they think about ideas, they try to take idea from reality, and great ideas come from anyone. And the fact of the matter is, someone who's a full-blown artist, someone who's a full-blown engineer, are going to have different perspectives and ideas than I'll have. So it's really important to be able to talk to them and value their ideas and expertise. One thing I really love is that I get to work with some people who are very senior and have like 20 years of experience. And that's awesome, because I just want to be a sponge and soak it all up. And it's also worth noting, if you're a designer and people feel like you're not listening to their ideas, it's kind of kind of lower their morale in the game because they want to feel like they're part of the project too, and really everyone is. So that's really important, is to just value everyone's diverse opinions and perspectives. And kind of on a tangent, the games industry has a diversity problem. We need a lot more people with diverse ideas and different backgrounds and stuff. I think if you read like what's it called, the IGDC, the International Game Development something, or GDC, they release surveys about this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, most of the people in the games industry, like 70% or something, look like me. They're a white guy. And that's fine, but we're missing out on a lot of diverse perspectives. And so that's something I always like to encourage, is trying to get all kinds of people into the games industry, because it's a really awesome place to be. We should be as inclusive as possible so we can take advantage of everyone's unique perspectives and abilities. And to that end, you should kind of augment your design skills with skills in other disciplines, which I think all of you are kind of doing. So I, in addition to level design, do a lot of level art and composition and environments and set dressing and lighting and stuff. And I also have skill in programming and Unreal that manifests more as Blueprint. I've worked in C#, Visual Basic, stuff like that. And then I have areas that are weak points, like animation. I think once I animated a solar system, I'm like, done with that. Sound design, I'm someone that loves music. I play music. I don't do what they do, but I love learning about it. And the more you can kind of learn about other disciplines, the more empowered you'll be as a designer, because you'll know more about what you're actually capable of accomplishing with the team you have. So for example, there might be something, I don't know if it's possible or not, but an engineer knows. And if I'm able to speak a little bit of that language, object-oriented programming or variable, whatever, I can communicate with them more effectively. And we can kind of understand each other and go back and forth. And education. This is not so much relevant to you guys, I think, because you're already here. Best education for becoming a game designer and just a game developer in general is practical game development. Just doing it. Just make something. Some degrees offer this kind of experience. It's not really a requirement, like you've all probably heard of Full Sail University or whatever. Most people I've worked with did not go to school for a game development degree. None of my design coworkers had a design degree. I work with people from all kinds of industries. They made stuff for games and they're qualified to work in games. But most game developers do have some form of higher education, where it's community college, or you're all here at NC State, so never a bad thing to have. I think I mentioned at the beginning, yes, my degree didn't quite have as much to do with my job, but there's still parts of my education I really value, and I'm glad I had this experience of being at a place like this and learning more about how I learn, the things that are effective for me when trying to acquire new skills, working with other people, all kinds of stuff. So I do feel some kind of education is a really valuable experience. So it's good you all are here. And I think this is probably near the end here. Professional versus hobbyist. Designing video games is an amazing job. I love it to death. It's a passion job, but still a job. So we have deadlines, we have requirements, we have constraints, we have meetings, whatever. It's not all fun and games. But again, it's an amazing job. When you hear people talk about their jobs, and you're like, yeah, I put the spreadsheet in the spreadsheet thing, and then the juice calculator made a couple juice boxes, and a strawberry popped out of the thing. It was like, whatever. I made a dragon catch on fire and blow up a skyscraper, and then Earth crashed into Galactor 7-9. If the kinds of conversations you have at a game development studio are way cooler than other. I hear my wife talking about her job, and and then she hears me talking about my job. And she's like, man, I wish I worked at a game studio. You just have fun. But yeah, deadlines, reviews, pressure, just like any job, that's all still there. And I think personally, a career of passion adds immeasurable value to life. But it's something you kind of have to evaluate for yourself. What are your career goals? Do you want to have a family? Do you want to be a quazillionaire? That's probably not a thing. What kind of, and this also applies to the specific place you work as well. What kind of work-life balance do you want? What kind of benefits do you want? What size team do you want to be on? knowing what I know, I personally would hate to be on an Assassin's Creed team working with thousands of people around the world making an Assassin's Creed. But then you also get to make the Assassin's Creed, or you get to make the God of War, or you get to make the next greatest big thing that everyone loves and adores. Maybe, but Call of Duty gets kind of responses. But it's about what you want and what you feel comfortable with, and there's opportunities for all kinds of things that align with your personal career goals, life goals, whatever. I think we're just getting started. So that's pretty much it. Well, I do have another thing. If we have time, we can go through that. But
a little bit over time already, but I think I answered. We're all still in. He just said he was leaving. So he's closing.
If he leaves, don't let him back in. It's the exclusive. So if you want to get connected with me, there's my current work email address and my LinkedIn. Feel free to ask me questions. I know a few of you have contacted me before. I think I've helped a couple of you with your resumes or portfolios. So I'm happy to answer any other questions, provide feedback, whatever. I really like doing this. I like trying to get people interested in game development as a career. Something I've talked about before. I think the industry has evolved a lot to be a much better place to work than it used to be, from my understanding. People used to talk about burnout and crunch and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, with the Activision Blizzard stuff, for some companies, there's a long way to go in terms of making the game development an inclusive, safe, exciting industry for everyone. But I've been fortunate enough to work at 2 companies that are very good at work-life balance and just a positive, uplifting culture. But yeah, I think some of those concerns are in the past. I mean, it's a creative industry. There are risks that are associated with that. If you spend X amount of money and you make something that's not good and you don't make a return on that investment, it could be a bad situation. But that's also kind of a reality in any industry. When I started in the games industry, I had a choice between a job at an IT company that were going to pay me a lot of money and then a choice to work at a game development studio. And I wasn't going to make bad money, but it certainly wasn't as good as the IT job. And my thinking at the time, and this was a weekend fraught with adventure. There was like a hurricane company. I also had interviews with another company. They were like fast tracking me because I knew I had offers on the table. A wild weekend. I talked to all my friends, all my family, and the consensus kind of was, if I don't do this now, I might never get the chance. Because I've worked with someone before doing an IT internship, and he used to be in the games industry. He really enjoyed it, but he got out of it, and they wanted to get back into it. And he found it really hard because the industry moves so quickly. It's hard to say yes to someone who's jumping back in as opposed to someone who's already in and up to date with all the current stuff. So I made the choice to take that chance and get into the games industry. And I'm so happy I did. I think it's one of the best decisions I've ever made. Now, 20 years from now, maybe I'm like, oh my God, that was a horrible decision. But thinking about the future is honestly kind of depressing because it's filled with unknowns and uncertainty. So I try to think about now and in the near term future and what I think is going to be most rewarding for my life. So I think that was a really important decision, and I'm happy I made it. So if you guys are really passionate about game development, you're really interested into it, I would encourage you to really take it seriously when you start applying to jobs and not be afraid to take that leap. Any questions about this? Okay, well, I have another thing we can talk about if you want to, if it's more interactive.